And I'll start sharing my screen. Right here. Okay, welcome everyone. Now that I'm sharing my screen, I can no longer see all of you. Uh, but it looks like we have about 10 participants so far. And I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to get started here. We're on session 2 here for the CoreTrustSeal requirements, and we're going to be primarily focusing on R0, but I want to get started on R1 as well if we can. But I'm going to try to do some review and move ahead each time so that we can everybody keep together if possible. So just as a little bit of a recap here, we've had several previous webinars where we talked about data stewardship, the principles that are out there, as well as certification instruments. We've talked about preservation, and in particular, looking at the designated community and sustainability issues. And we delved into the CoreTrustSeal certification requirements and looking at organizational aspects of data stewardship. We had previously looked at the CoreTrustSeal requirements for 2020 to 2022. They've been replaced by the ones for 2022 to 2025. And we started going over those a bit, looking at planning to meet the CoreTrustSeal requirements. And we talked about motivation and the R0 requirement last week. For this week, or that was 2 weeks ago, for this session, we're going to talk primarily about the R0 requirement, but I hope to get into the R1 requirement as well if we can squeeze that in. And we're going to be having a lecture, questions, and a discussion, but please feel free to interrupt me. I'm not sure if I'm going to see hands raised on my screen, but if there's a question, please go ahead and speak up, and we can try to address those questions as we go. This session is being recorded, and it can be available from the Zoom. I think they allow it to be available for a few weeks, maybe a month. But you can copy it from there and put that in the Servir West Africa website or anywhere you want. But they do take it down, I'm told, after a certain period of time, because we're recording each one, and each one takes a lot of space, and so they can't give all the space to me. But please look at it if you like, and within say a month of it being posted, and then if you want, download it, and you can continue looking at it after then. But the slides I'm putting up on our Columbia University institutional repository, and so they should be available for a long time. So today what we're going to talk about is some planning and brief introductions for those who haven't already introduced themselves. Then we're going to go into the sessions and application preparation. And hopefully we can schedule the next session. And then we're going to talk briefly, a little review of the benefits of CoreTrustSeal, as well as the review of the certification and the processes. And then we're going to do a quick review of the requirements for 2023, all the requirements for 2023 to 2025. We're going to delve then into CoreTrustSeal requirement 0 some more. You might recall we had started on that last time. And then hopefully we're going to get into CoreTrustSeal requirement 1 and then talk about preparation for our next session. So in terms of our progress planning and introductions, what I've done is I've created some templates for some of the repositories that I'm aware of, but and that's SERVIR, ICRASAT, FMNR, AFRIGIST, and AGRIMAT. But what I would like to do is to create more templates for any other repositories that are participating so that we can have everybody developing their self-assessments using the CoreTrustSeal application templates. And I'm glad to create more. So if there are additional repositories, I ask that you please put the acronym for the repository in the chat, as well as the email address for the main contributor, at least to that repository. But if there are others who will be participating in the development of the self-assessment, please put those email addresses in too, associated with that repository. Because what I'm going to do is for each of these repositories and any new ones, templates that I create, I'm going to send out the privileges to access the template to the members of that repository. Currently, as I mentioned, I've got these 4, and I believe I have one person at least for each of those 4. And once I send that out, the person who gets it should have editing privileges, so they should be able to add others. I'm sorry, did somebody have a question? No? Sorry. Anyway, if there are any additional repositories, please put the acronym for the repository in the chat along with the email address. And I can send these out right after this session, along with any others that are and if oh, I do see there is a chat now. I'm going to take a chance and just see that. Oh, okay. So okay, we've got Garba put the contact for ICRASAT, and is that that's ICRASAT Niger? Is that different from ICRASAT FMNR? I'm not sure. In other words, should I be creating one for ICRASAT FMNR and one for ICRASAT Niger?
We are working together. ECRISAT Niger, we have one service, FMNR, but I'm at the high level, like I'm on not only for the service of FMNR, but the other service too.
I see. So should I be creating just the one for FMNR, or should I have another one?
You can keep for FMNR one.
I see. Okay, just the one then for now. Okay.
I think FMNR is okay. I think.
Oh, okay.
And that's why last week I put the Garba's email and name to represent the Grishat, and he will proceed with all the steps of the CoreTrustSeal training. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kidia, for the clarification. Okay, and if there are any others, please put them in the chat. So, and if there are additional people who hadn't joined previously, and you want to be sure you're getting these invitations for future sessions, please put your email address in the Zoom chat as well, and I can add you to the list. And also, if there are any people on who hadn't previously introduced themselves, this is a good opportunity to introduce yourselves if you would like to do so. You can either do that by putting your name and email address in the chat, or if you want, you can just say that. But if you haven't given your email address previously, it would be good if you could put that in the chat. Okay, not hearing any additional introductions, I'm going to move forward. So our next session is planned for Wednesday, May 22nd at the same time as this session. And we'll be doing a review of the R0 requirement and moving forward with the R1 requirement. I'm also hoping to touch on R2 then a bit, but we'll see how the session goes. And as I had mentioned previously, we hope to have these scheduled twice monthly, and we'll have both a review in each session as well as an introduction to new topics. Okay, I want to just quickly go over the overview of CoreTrustSeal and the benefits of the CoreTrustSeal certification. Basically, these are community developed requirements. So the repository community is working together, and what they're trying to do is improve all of their capabilities so that we can all be trustworthy data stewards. And it's really a process where we work together to improve our data repositories. And the repositories are learning from each other during the review process. They're getting comments from peer reviewers who are making suggestions and asking questions. And the assessments, they provide evidence of the self-assessment that each data repository has completed. So the reviewers are members of the Assembly of Reviewers, as well as the members of the CoreTrustSeal board. And as I had mentioned before, these requirements, they evolve by changing every 3 years. So as members of the community makes suggestions about how to improve the requirements, and all those suggestions are reviewed. New revisions to the requirements are proposed. The community reviews them, and then they are revised, and the new requirements are in place for 3 years before they're revised again. And so in terms of the benefits, it's a way to provide long-term trustworthy access to your holdings. And so the repositories can improve their capabilities, and they're learning from the peer reviewers about improvements that are needed, and ways to correct deficiencies. And basically, the process is in many ways self-paced. That is, each repository is completing a self-assessment at their own pace, and when they're ready, they take their self-assessment and they apply for a CoreTrustSeal certification, which gives them recognition as a trustworthy repository. And this is recognition for the host institution, the funders, the data producers, and others can see that the repository has achieved CoreTrustSeal certification. It's, in a way, it's kind of a branding, and it shows that you are a trusted repository of your data holdings, and that you're certified as having attained this community standard. And so, as we talked about last week, it's really a stepping stone to World Data System membership. And the repository can serve as an exemplar for other data repositories. We had talked last week about the intrinsic benefits. I just want to go over them briefly again, where this is a way to become validated as trustworthy, showing that you're improving your capabilities, and you're also receiving some advice from others. And this is a great way for the community to work together and get suggestions for how to improve. And it's a justification to publicly document the processes that you have, and it shows that you're continuously improving your quality and that your organization is performing. You have professional development in hand, and it's a way to improve your documentation, and it gives you an opportunity for introspection. And it's also an opportunity to correct any weaknesses that you have. And as I mentioned, it is a way for eligibility for World Data System membership and to participate in the repository community. In terms of the extrinsic benefits, we can demonstrate our trustworthiness. It shows evidence of our practices for digital preservation, and it exudes confidence from our stakeholders in how we're doing things. And it really enhances our reputation and helps to meet the expectations of our stakeholders. Our stakeholders all want us to do better, and this is a way to do that. It's a way of showing transparently what we're doing as a repository, and it shows that we are being recognized by the stakeholders. And again, gives us that branding, shows that we are certified, and improving the confidence of the data producers in what we do. It's also increasing awareness in our role as data stewards, and gives us some distinction and allows us to serve as an exemplar, as I previously mentioned. So before we move on, are there any questions about why we pursue certification? For instance, why should the data repository work in isolation without the benefit others experience? If we are working together, we're going to be able to help each other. Also, will this effort enable a repository to learn about new resources? And I say certainly yes. There are practices being adopted by the data repository community internationally, and the community is sharing their practices not only through their peer review comments on the applications for CoreTrustSeal certification, but the World Data System members also share their experiences with others. And so this advice does contribute to the capabilities of not only the repositories, but to the professional development of the repository staff members. And so it really improves the data repository, and it's really a laudable experience. And it does enable the repository to identify ways of improvement, and it offers a way to improve our services and improve the satisfaction of our users, and to implement measures to improve our efficiency and effectiveness. Any other questions about the benefits of CoreTrustSeal certification? Or thoughts, comments? Okay, moving forward, we're going to have a brief review of the process for attaining CoreTrustSeal certification. You might recall, we're now on the 23 to 25 CoreTrustSeal requirements, and they're going to be revised again in 2025. And out of that process will come the requirements for 2026 through 2028. These are reflecting the community practices. Basically, the expectations of our users change all the time. They expect more, and the technology changes, the practices within the community changes, and so as we learn more, we can improve. And these revisions that are made are based on consensus among the community members, and they are evolving incrementally. There really aren't great changes from one revision to the next. They're very incremental, and as you get certified, say based on the requirements for 23 to 25, then in 26 to 28, new requirements will come out, and then you would use those requirements to get recertified. In the process for attaining CoreTrustSeal certification is first completing the self-assessment, which we're really going through this process now. I'll be sending out these templates where each repository can work on improving their practices, documenting what they're doing to meet each of the requirements. And it's really, your own worksheet, if you will, where you can put down your ideas, areas where you think you want to improve, things that you think you've already accomplished. And in this way, you can begin working towards documenting how you've met each of the requirements, so that at some point when you feel that you've met the majority of the requirements, that's a good point to complete the online application form, where you would record your responses along with the evidence. And the evidence generally is your description of how you are meeting a requirement, but it's also a link to the online publicly accessible information that serves as the documentation for what you're saying you're doing. So basically, we want to show that we do what we say we're doing. So I had mentioned before, there is an administrative fee for each application, and it's currently 3,000 euros, but they do have a waiver processes and processes in place for reduced fees. And so these can apply to the repositories that are in developing countries. And they also have for consortiums, that is groups of repositories. So say the severe repositories work together. If a group of them works together, they can apply for a discount that way. And for each requirement that the repository is reporting on, that is, they're providing the response, they have to specify their compliance level. So this is a self-assessed compliance level, and that you can say that you believe that this implementation is in progress, or you can say that it's already been implemented. And you can make that assessment yourself. And of course, you're going to be describing how you believe you've met that compliance level. But when it's reviewed, the reviewers will actually, they will assess it themselves, each reviewer, and they will, in terms of their assessment, also assign a compliance level. And the review process is done where two members of the Assembly of Reviewers, they review each CoreTrustSeal application. And if there are new reviewers, they are paired with experienced reviewers. And as I mentioned, they reassign a compliance level to what they believe based on your evidence that you've provided. And then the compliance, the CoreTrustSeal Standards and Compliance Board, they review the applications and the review submitted by the reviewers, and they make their assessment, and they would either return the application to the submitter with the recommendations for improvement, or they might say that you've met the certification requirements and that you're certified for a 3-year period. Again, for the compliance levels, they're either in progress or implemented. Every single compliance level doesn't have to be implemented, but certainly the expectation is that most have been implemented. If there's one or two that haven't been implemented, then the recommendation will be that for subsequent CoreTrustSeal certification, that those would be implemented. So what are the steps involved? Well, first, the repository, in looking at the CoreTrustSeal requirements, they look at what improvements need to be done and what resources are needed. And you can use the template, for example, to make notes of these things. We need to do this. We would need to get capabilities to do this. We might need to train our staff, for example. And we would conduct this self-assessment, and there we're identifying each area to be improved, and then preparing that by describing what we've done in terms of improvement. My suggestion is to use the template to describe what needs to be improved, so you have a place where you can work on that, and as you improve it, you can make notes. This part of it's been done, but we still need to do this. And people can be assigned to work on those things, either individually or as teams. You can also look at how other repositories have met a particular requirement. And by going to the CoreTrustSeal website, they have put all the completed CoreTrustSeal certification applications online. So we can read any application that's been already certified, and see how others met that particular requirement and see if if their approach is appropriate for our repository, or if we might want to do things in a different way.
Bob, one thing I would suggest is maybe for you to go through and identify some of the repository applications that you feel are exemplary and that might be broadly in the domains that our colleagues in West Africa are working in, largely geospatial and data for development purposes. So if you could filter them and put some of those in the folder where you have the drive folder, where you have the draft applications, those would be good examples, perhaps for them to follow. Thanks.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Alex. Yes, that's a great example, a great idea to show examples that are applicable to the repositories here. And so we'll be collecting those for everybody to see. And the value of applying for the certification process is getting the comments back from the reviewers, looking at what they're recommending that needs to be done. And once you get certified, again, that's valid for 3 years. Are there any other comments or questions on the CoreTrustSeal certification? Okay, we're going to take a quick look at all of the CoreTrustSeal requirements for 2023 to 2025 before we get into our zero again. So this is the overview of all of the requirements. And as you see here, there are really 4 sections. There's the background information. There's the organizational infrastructure, the digital object management, and the technology. So our zero, that contains information to provide context. So this way the reviewers and others who read the application will get a general idea about the repository, how it operates, what its community is, the disciplines that it serves, its resources, its partners, those kinds of things. And if you're going for a renewal, which none of you are at this point, but after getting certified and you're going through a renewal, then you will also summarize any significant changes since the last application. And so as we look at the CoreTrustSeal requirements for organizational infrastructure, we see that R1 through R6 all have to do with how the organization is managing the repository. So R1 discusses the mission and scope. And here they're looking for a commitment to providing access and preserving digital objects for the long term. R2 is looking at how rights are managed for the repository. That is, how the rights are assigned to the data products or information products and services that are accessible by the user community. Are we maintaining rights for people to use them, and are we monitoring compliance for adhering to those rights? R3 is looking at the continuity of service. That is, the idea here is our repository shouldn't just be around for today. It should be continuing to operate over time, and it should have a plan to do so. And if it's unable to operate over time, it should have a plan for the continuation of the services, that is either by working with partners, host organizations, sponsors, or others, or perhaps like members of a consortium, to continue serving the users and providing access and preserving the data and the metadata that's available. R4 is looking at the legal and ethical issues. And so in this way, we're ensuring that the laws that the repository that govern the jurisdiction for which the repository is located are followed, and that the repository is also following the ethical norms of either the community that it serves or its region, and also of the scientific disciplines that it's associated with. And in this way, the repository is doing what it thinks is right for the people it serves, basically.
I think an example there would be of human subjects or health-related data, which in aggregate can be used safely, but if you can identify any personal identifiable information or patient records or that kind of thing, it would be very, it would create a huge ethical breach. So maybe providing some examples of these is a good idea as well. For instance, rights management number 2, we at CDAC, our NASA data center, we get signed permissions to disseminate data that basically authorizes us to disseminate the data sets that are provided to us for archive and dissemination. And the authors of the data actually attest to the fact that they have the right to sign that form and make the data open to the public. So it's one way of protecting, copyright and other things if there were in fact, data that were restricted in terms of their permissions over.
Yes, thank you very much, Alex. And yes, those are excellent examples. And so yes, as we get into each of these individually, we'll be giving specific examples of how we can meet each of these and how different repositories have done that, including, as Alex mentioned, the NASA Socioeconomic Data and Application Center, known as CDAC, that we operate for NASA. Looking at R5, governance and resources, here we want to demonstrate that we have sufficient staff to operate the repository, and that we have the funding so that we can pay their staff, obviously, and to manage those resources so that we're able to serve our community. And then the last one in this section of organizational infrastructure is expertise and guidance. And here we want to demonstrate not only that we have the expertise amongst the staff members who are operating the repository, and that those staff members are getting developed, they're receiving training on what they're doing, but that we have guidance, that is, we're getting guidance from others who are experts. And this could be like an advisory board. For example, CDAC has what we call a user working group that serves as our advisory board. And they give us guidance and feedback on how we're doing things and suggestions for new data products, etc., that or the types of data that we might want to provide, so that they, as representatives of our user community, will be able to utilize our resources even more. Looking at the next set of requirements, they're referred to as digital object management. and that's R7 through R13. So R7 refers to provenance and authenticity. And when we talk about the provenance, we're really talking about the record of the history of the data products that have been created. That is, we want to know how the data repository, the data product was created, when it was created, um, who created it, what they observed, what instruments were used. We also want to know that the data objects that we're providing are in fact authentic. That is, how do we know that the data product that we're disseminating today is in fact the data product that we disseminated yesterday? And that's done through integrity checking and verifying over time that our holdings are in fact the same over time, the same data products that we acquired and disseminated last year, we're still disseminating this year. R8 refers to deposit and appraisal. And deposit, as you know, is when data producers, they submit the data to the repository for dissemination to others. But appraisal is referring to the review process. We're having a vetting, if you will, where we ensure that the data that we're getting are going to meet the needs of the community. And each repository might do this in a different way, and based on what its community needs are and what its resources are. And so that would be explained in R8. Each repository is expected to have a plan for preservation, which is described in R9. Here, the repository demonstrates how it's preserving its data and how it's managing the preservation process itself, and that it's done in a planned and documented way. Also, the quality of service is important, and that's described in R10. So there you talk about any standards compliance that the repository has adopted, and that it uses to ensure that the information is available to end users about how the quality related evaluations are done. Workflows it's really the sequence of activities that the repository engages in. And some things are done at the same time, simultaneously. So again, each repository is different in terms of how they manage their workflow. But what's expected for the CoreTrustSeal certification is that this workflow is documented and made publicly accessible to your user community. That is, your user community should be able to see how the repository conducts its work from the point where it's beginning its processes, it gets the data from the data producers, it conducts its review, for example, any processing engaged, the preservation, the curation, preparation for dissemination, and how it supports its community, even in terms of any questions that the community members may have, or how it identifies the needs of the community so that the repository will know which data sets to seek out and disseminate to its community. R12 refers to enabling discovery and identification of the digital objects that the repository manages. So the repository is expected to enable the community to find its data. And it might use search capabilities. It might use faceted discovery. It may put its catalog out there to be harvested by various indexes so that the larger community can see them. And each repository, again, is different in the way it does this. And it is expected, though, that the repository will have a way to refer to its digital objects in a persistent manner. That is, over time, the same digital object identifier could be used to access the data, so that if you access it this year with a particular URL, for example, you'll be able to access that same digital object next year using that same URL. And then finally, in this section, R13 is associated with reuse. And here we want to make sure that the digital objects are in a state where they can be reused. That is, they're adequately described so that members of the community, the designated community, will be able to use them. There should be appropriate documentation, metadata, and descriptions of perhaps like the variables that are used, the uses, the applications of the data, and even if there are improper uses, those should be mentioned so that people don't try to use the data in a way that might not be appropriate for the type of data that are being disseminated. Finally, the information technology and security section that involves 3 requirements. R14 is dealing with storage integrity. You're showing how your data is stored, where you store it, how the processes for storage are documented, and it's both for data and metadata. And then R15 is referring to the technical infrastructure that is used so that you can describe your operating systems and how they're supported, and any infrastructural software that's being used, as well as hardware. If you're using services that are provided by others, those should be described under the technical infrastructure, and how you enable access through those services to your designated community. And then finally, for R16, security, the repository would describe how it's ensuring that the facility is protected. That is, to make sure that the data, the metadata, and the services aren't compromised in some way. And this could be both physical security on any premises where the repository is managed, as well as the security on the systems that are being utilized to provide access and to preserve the digital objects over time. So those are all the requirements, and we'll be going over each one individually, but it's important to look at them as a whole, because as we're going through our template, answering one requirement, putting in our response for how we're meeting one requirement, we might recognize at that point that what we're doing for one requirement is related to another requirement, and we can begin writing down how we're also meeting another requirement and showing the relationship between these requirements and how we're meeting them is important because this way we can provide brief responses to each of the requirements and show that if somebody wants more information about a particular aspect of what we're doing, they can find that by looking at the details under another requirement. Any other comments or questions on the CoreTrustSeal requirements in general? Okay, hearing none, let's get back into CoreTrustSeal requirement 0. You might recall we had talked about this last week. And the idea with CoreTrustSeal requirement 0 is just to provide context. This way, the reviewer and any readers who read the application will get an understanding about the repository, just a general understanding, an overview, if you will. And the repository first describes the RE3 identifier. Some of you might already have an RE3 identifier. We'll talk about that some more in a few minutes. And we talked about that a bit last week. You also will choose a repository type. Most repositories either select themselves as a generalist repository, means that they cover lots of different fields, or a specialist repository that's just covering a very narrow field. So the narrow field might be they just look at earth and environmental information, for example. And then if they are a specialist repository, they would describe the scope of that. And then the next section of R0 is to provide just a brief description of the repository. This is just a paragraph, perhaps 2 short paragraphs, generally describing the repository and what kinds of information and data it provides to its designated community. It could get into the disciplines a little bit that it serves. And then for the next part, it asks for a brief description of the designated community. So here the repository has an opportunity to define its designated community, and that might be people who have specific knowledge or expertise. It might be people who have attained a specific level in terms of that expertise, or it could be for people who are just interested in that area. And so each repository really decides for itself what its designated community is. But this is very important because knowing who you serve enables you to serve them, to determine how you're going to serve them and how you're going to be able to meet their needs. And then the level of curation. Here a repository decides what level or levels of curation it's performing, from basic curation to enhanced curation. And you can choose more than one level. And then any cooperation and outsourcing to either third parties or partners or even within your own host organization. And as I had previously mentioned, if you're renewing for certification, then you would mention what you had done since your last renewal. So recall last session, we had talked about R0, and we also asked each of you to discuss the R0 requirement with your managers and staff of your repository, and to particularly look at the RE3 data identifier. And that's pronounced RE3 data identifier, if you like. And basically, the RE3 data or RE3 data is it's a catalog of repositories. And so various repositories are listed there, and the CoreTrustSeal wants to see each repository that's certified listed in RE3 data. And this way, people can search for the repository using the search capabilities of RE3 data at the re3data.org website. So in terms of the RE3 data or RE3 data, it's a RE3 data stands for Registry of Research Data Repository. So the RE is repeated 3 times, and that's why they call it RE3 data. It's kind of cute. And this is a global registry of repositories. And this way, potential depositors, if they're looking for a repository to disseminate their data, they can look there and find a repository that serves the disciplines or the kinds of data that they are interested in. Likewise, users who are interested in finding data, they can look on the registry and identify which repository they might be interested in searching for data. And people can use that RE3 data search service by just entering a topic as a query and looking for it. So in our E3 data or RE3 data, in order to register a repository, you have to put in the title of the repository, the subjects that are covered by the repository, the content types where the repository that the repository provides, the country where the repository is located, and just provide a very brief narrative description of the repository. So this is copied from the re3data.org registration policy. And so what they're asking is it should be run, the repository should be run by a legal entity. And that could be by a university, a library, or some other sustainable institution. That it clarifies its access conditions to the data, as well as the terms of use, and that they have a focus on research data. And so basically, what they're asking is that the research data repository in RE3 data is either a data provider, and they define that as offering research data and its metadata through interfaces, or a service provider. That is, it could be a portal and harvests metadata of research data from data providers or data producers as a basis for building value-added services. And you can go to this re3data.org website and read about the registry and actually search it. Look for other repositories and information about them. as I said, it's going to be required that each repository that applies for CoreTrustSeal certification has been registered in re3 data, but that doesn't have to be done right away. As you begin working on your application, you can be thinking about these things. So, and about how you would register your repository, how you would describe your repository in re3 data. But the important thing is that you register and you get an identifier from re3 data once you register a repository, and your application for CoreTrustSeal will need to include that as part of the application. So this also is copied from the re3data.org website. And basically it's instructions on how to add your repository to re3 data. So and this is done basically by completing a form where you suggest the repository to be listed in re3 data. And you answer the questions and in the form, and those are the questions that I pointed to back here: the title of the repository, the subjects, the content type, the country, and the brief narrative description. And then the re3 data project team, they analyze your website and the description that you provided for them in accordance with their guidance, and they come back to you with any questions that they might have, and you might have to answer their questions, or they might be satisfied with what you provided, and then they index it when they feel that it truly is a repository, it's a legitimate repository, it has a website, etc., and that it's focusing on research data, and they give you an identifier. At that point, the repository is listed in the re3 data registry. So anybody can search the re3 data registry to find the repository and read about the kinds of data that it provides. And they also show a little workflow here at the bottom of the screen where you can see their process for approving a repository for re3 data, for the re3 data registry. So in addition to providing the re3 data identifier in the CoreTrustSeal application, the repository has to describe its repository type. And basically, a generalist repository covers lots of different topics. An example of a generalist repository might be an institutional repository. That is a repository that's serving an entire university that has lots of different subject areas and topics covered. And so that would be considered a generalist repository. On the other hand, a specialist repository is covering a much narrower field. It could be, as I mentioned earlier, the discipline of earth science or environmental science, for example. Or it could be serving, for instance, the medical community, or a very special category of the medical community. It's just looking at, for instance, elderly care as an example, and that would be a very specialized repository looking at how to care for the aging. And the repository does need to describe the disciplines represented by the content that it disseminates. So if we're thinking about the discipline that a repository is represented, is representing, and how we might describe that, we want to think about it in terms of the community that it serves, and we're calling that the designated community. We also want to think about the knowledge base, that is the expertise that the designated community possesses. Because the information that we provide about any data is associated with their understanding of that area. In other words, if we're talking about data that pertain to the environment, are we expecting the people to have a PhD in environmental studies? Or are we serving anybody who has an interest, which could be even grammar school children? So those are the things we have to think about. Excuse me. So just 1 second here, please. So in terms of describing our repository, we do want to give a narrative description of it. And here we're describing the scope and the size of the data collections, any data types and formats that we're supporting in these collections, and any additional information that will provide the reader with some context about the repository and the data that it offers and the community that it serves. And this, as I mentioned, this just has to be, either a paragraph or two to just give an overview of the repository. So here we might ask ourselves, how might we describe our repository for reviewers and the public? What might we say about the repository? And if it's a specialist repository, we might want to say, we're serving people who are interested in agriculture, for example, and there we would talk about the types of data that we're providing for people to use. We might even talk about whether the data provide a historical context or they're just recent data that we provide. We might talk about the data types that or formats that we're providing, the types of instruments that are used, whether these are, for instance, data that are just coming out of a laboratory, if they're data that are coming out of field observations, or if they're satellite data, for example. Here, I should emphasize, though, that we don't want to become too specific about the types of services that we're offering, and the individual data collections, for example, because we will have opportunities elsewhere to talk about those in the application form. Here, we're just giving a very broad overview so that people will understand generally about the repository and its holdings. We also want to provide a brief description of the designated community. And so here we're talking about the disciplines of the designated community, the areas of expertise, if you will, that we expect the designated community to have. That is, if we're expecting them to be experts in particular instruments, we would describe that here. Or if we're expecting them to just have a general knowledge or just a general interest in a particular discipline or in a particular topic, we should describe that here. Also, if we're expecting the users to be experts in particular methodologies or in using particular formats of data or software to use that data, we should be describing that here as well. Alternatively, if we're providing data in multiple formats, we might give examples of the kinds of formats that we're providing the data in, and either the software that they could use to access those formats, or we could even describe the services that we provide as a repository that enable the users to access and analyze the data. In other words, if we're providing services for analysis, perhaps the users don't need software at all, and they just need to have a web browser to be able to access our services. And so we do want to describe, though, the designated community so that the reviewers will be able to understand the expected level of expertise that the users are possess, so that they will know whether the data that we're providing can actually be used by the users. That is, are we enabling the users, our designated community members, to use the data? Are we describing the data in the documentation in a manner that can be understood by our designated community? So here we would ask questions like, how can we describe our designated community in terms of their disciplinary backgrounds or the education that they're expected to have? And about the knowledge base of the designated community in terms of the areas of expertise or any understanding that they might have on particular methodologies, tools, services, or software that they might need to utilize to analyze the data. Before I move on, any other questions? Okay, well, looking at the level of curation performed, some repositories might just distribute the content in the same manner that it's deposited. That is, they might not provide any service other than disseminating the data that they receive. And if that's the case, they would just choose A as content is distributed as deposited. And a repository might choose more than one of these levels of curation. That is, they might take some content and distribute it directly to the community in the same manner that they receive it, but they also might do other things. For instance, for some data sets, perhaps they engage in basic curation. And they might decide that is, for all data sets, they're going to engage in basic curation. That is, no data is going to be distributed directly as it's deposited. Every data set that's received is going to be reviewed, whether it's a brief checking or more extensive checking. And the metadata is going to be reviewed, the documentation, the data as well is going to be reviewed. And that would be considered just basic curation. As I said, any repository can choose one or more of these levels. For instance, at CDAC that we operate for NASA, we engage in basic curation for some data sets, but for many other data sets, we engage in enhanced curation and in data level curation. So we actually engage in B, C, and D. We have three categories. And none of the content is distributed in the same manner that it's deposited, because minimally we have to review the data and the metadata and any documentation that's received to make sure that the designated community will be able to understand and use that data. Getting into enhanced curation, that's assuming that you've done the basic curation, but you want to do more. And that is, you might be converting the data to new formats or enhancing the documentation or the metadata. Similarly, data level curation assumes even a greater level of curation, and you're doing the enhanced curation, but you're also doing additional editing of the data if necessary, or the metadata to make sure that it's accurate. And so you might have more extensive review processes with data level curation and curation processes as well. And you would describe your levels of curation, the way that you're doing them, so that the reviewers will be able to understand what you mean by you're only doing data curation, or I'm sorry, you're only doing basic curation, or you're only doing content content distributed as deposited, etc. So here we would ask ourselves, are we only applying one level of curation? That is, maybe all curation or all data are just disseminated as they're deposited? Or are we just doing basic level curation, or are we doing these higher level curation activities as well? And we want to describe whether it's just one level or multiple levels. And we also want to describe whether we're engaging the submitter, that is, the person who submits the data, which might be the data producer, whether we're engaging them in the curation activity. That is, well, we're looking at the metadata. Are we asking them questions to improve the description of the metadata, or to get clarification on the description that they provided, to ensure that the metadata, for example, is understandable by the designated community? And then we also want to mention any cooperation or outsourcing to third parties that's engaged in by the repository. So in terms of the outsourcing, these might be vendors that we're working with. They might be contractors. They could even be our sponsors, funders, for example, who we're working with to ensure that the data that we provide can meet the needs and serve the community, our designated community. In terms of outsourcing, I'm sorry, insourcing, these are partners who are within our own organization. So if we're part of a university, it might be that we're working with a department, other departments, the libraries, the university information technology offices, any number of administrative departments in the university, for example, or a library that are helping us to meet our community's needs. So we would describe them separately. That is, we would describe the in-source partners first, and what those partners are doing, how they're helping us, and then describe our outsource partners. And if they're contractors, describe them as being a partner. We have a contract with them, or if it's a vendor, we've purchased their products and we purchase support from them, for example, to describe that. And so questions we want to ask ourselves with regard to the insourcing is, what units in our organization contribute or help us to support our community? And for the outsourcing, what are the external entities? And how are they involved with the repository to help us to serve our community? And as I mentioned, these could be contractors or service providers, and we would mention the kind of relationship we have with them. If it's either a contract for a particular duration, or if it's a product we purchase and a service that they provide in association with that purchase. And we talked about applicants who are renewing. We're not in that category, so we'll move on from there. So we'll have any questions on describing the designated community? That is, in terms of its level of expertise, whether they are looking at particular disciplines, or they're expected to have achieved a certain level of education. Those are the kinds of things that we want to think about when we describe the designated community. And then which aspects of the cooperation partnerships are involved for the outsourcing. And we want to describe those. So for these external partners, if you will, so that they're clear. Are there any other questions about the outsourcing or insourcing, or really about any aspects designated community? Okay, well, we've got a couple minutes left, so I just want to start introducing R1. That's about the mission and scope. And here, basically, the repository has an explicit mission to provide access to and preserve digital objects. So we want to describe the mission. We want to provide a link to the repository's mission statement as evidence, and any other supporting information on our website that describes what we do, the scope of our work as a repository. And we also want to describe the level of approval that that mission has received. And so we're providing links to a publicly accessible mission statement and information about our repository, so the community can read about those. So this is, excuse me, a very general requirement, R1. And here we're just describing the scope of our repository, but the mission statement should describe the scope of the repository. And we should be able to provide some additional information about our mission statement, such as who approved it, and what level of approval. That is this approved by the managers of the repository or by others? Is input for this received from the staff members, for example? How is it developed? And the scope of the repository in terms of the community that we serve, the topics, the kinds of data and information that we're providing to the community. So that's a brief introduction to R1. while we have a minute left, I want you to, I'm going to send out these templates. And please, the person who receives them, they should be able to get their team to work with them to start working with the template and review the requirements for R0 and start discussing those requirements and writing down in the template how you think you're meeting each of these categories. If you don't have a RE3 data identifier yet, that's not a problem. You can develop that later, but you want to start thinking about how you're going to describe your repository for RE3 data, and draft responses to all of the sections of R0. And if you like, you can even, draft in your response things that you think you should be working on so that your response will be better. So with that, I want to ask, are there any final questions that anyone has? And we'll be sending out these templates to each of the repositories. I see Mansoor has raised a hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. My question is from R0 to R16. Really is a different step, and I think that will be nice to see one example that can help, because here is theory and really we understand, but if we follow one example, that can help really the participant to have a really fresh idea about what we get the theory and now the practice, and it's really easy for us to deal with our task and our institution. That is my suggestion. Thank you.
Yes, that's an excellent comment and question, Mansoor. And so, yes, I will be sending around links to several examples so that you can look at them and in terms of the applications that have been submitted for repositories that have been certified. So these are completed applications for certified repositories. You can see how they have responded to each of the questions. We'll have a few where we can look at, and this way you can get a good idea of the kinds of responses that other repositories have provided when attaining CoreTrustSeal certification. So yeah, that's a great question, Mansoor, and I certainly will be sending those around.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions before we leave? Okay, well, I will be sending around the link to the recording for this session. I also will be submitting the slides to our institutional repository. They will put them up on their website, and once they do that, I'll share that with you as well. Again, our next session is planned for, I think that was about the 22nd. Gee. I will be sending around that, May 22nd at the same time. That's Wednesday, May 22nd, is at the same time as this session. And I'll be sending around that invitation, the calendar invite for that session as well. And so again, I want to thank all of you for participating in today's session. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next week, and please expect to receive all these resources from me.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Okay, bye-bye.